Deportation Diplomacy, Why Liberia is at the Center of Trump's Controversial Migration Move. From the heart of Africa to the corridors of global power, this is the Bold African Voice, BAV, where truth meets courage. I'm Amie Kallon, and today on Africa Now, Weekly Digest, we dive into a story shaking diplomatic tables across the Atlantic. The Trump administration wants to deport a Salvadoran man, not to El Salvador, not to Costa Rica, but to Liberia. Why Liberia? What does this mean for Africa's sovereignty, and how should African leaders respond? Stay tuned, because this is more than deportation. This is deportation diplomacy. Setting the scene. Here,
Abrego Garcia.
So the answer is you've done nothing to correct the president.
Of MS-13, a wife beater and a human trafficker that should never have been in this country to begin with.
The Trump administration may soon deport Salvadoran immigrant Kilmar Abrego Garcia to Liberia, according to a Department of Homeland Security filing. Abrego Garcia could be sent as early as October 31st under a standing deportation order, according to court filings. He was mistakenly deported to El Salvador in March despite a 2019 protection ruling barring his removal there. His case has become a flashpoint in the clash between Trump's deportation agenda and Democratic efforts to block removals. Abrego Garcia's attorneys said he fears prosecution or torture in over 20 countries, though Liberia is not on that list. The DHS filing called Liberia a thriving democracy and a close U.S. partner on the African continent. Liberia's constitution reportedly provides strong human rights protections and humane treatment of refugees. DHS said it received diplomatic assurances from Liberia regarding Abrego Garcia's safe treatment. His attorneys criticized the move as political retribution and part of a pattern of punitive deportation tactics. A federal judge previously noted the prosecution may be retaliation for Garcia successfully challenging a prior unlawful deportation. Abrego Garcia entered the U.S. illegally in 2011 and was issued a deportation order in 2019. Two judges had found he was likely affiliated with MS-13, affecting where he could be deported. Trump officials acknowledged the March deportation to El Salvador was an administrative error, though some called him a gang member. One 2019 immigration judge found Garcia did not sufficiently refute MS-13 affiliation and barred removal to El Salvador due to threats. The latest move to deport him comes as Abrego Garcia remains in immigration detention in Pennsylvania.
Y hermanas, mi nombre es Kilmar Abrego Garcia y siempre quiero que recuerden que hoy puedo decir con orgullo que estoy libre y me reuní con mi familia.
Brothers and sisters, my name is Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and I want you to remember this. Remember that I am free, and I was able to be reunited with my family.
Un milagro, gracias a Dios y gracias a toda la comunidad.
This was a miracle. Thank you to God, and thank you to the community power.
Y por eso quiero decirles las gracias a cada uno de ustedes que marcharon, levantaron sus voces y oraron y nunca dejaron de creer y luchar por mi libertad.
And this is why I want to thank each and every one of you who marched, lift your voices, never stopped praying, and continued to fight in my name.
Gracias a mi pareja de vida, mi esposa Jennifer, mi hermano César, mi madre Cecilia, y toda mi familia.
Thank you to my life partner and wife, Jennifer, to my brother, Cesar, to my mother, Cecilia, to my children, to my nieces and nephews, to all of my family.
Gracias a casa, mi segunda casa, a mi sindicato SMART, a todos los pastores, a todas las iglesias, organizaciones y mis equipos legales.
Thank you to Casa, my second home, to my union, SMART, to all of the organizations, all of the faith leaders, all of the partners, and my legal team.
Me he enterado cómo la comunidad me ha apoyado, me ha abrazado con tanto amor y solidaridad.
I have come to know how the community has stood up with so much support and has hugged me with so much solidarity.
Y desde el primer día quiero agradecer también a Dios que siempre ha estado conmigo y ha estado dando bendiciones a toda mi familia.
And I also want to thank God, who has been giving me blessings since day one, to me and to all of my family.
Cuando por fin me reuní con mi familia, esa alegría y todas las emociones quedarán grabadas para el resto de mi vida.
When I was finally able to reunite with my family, all of those emotions, all of those memories will be forever ingrained in me.
Verlos de nuevo me llenó de gratitud y esperanza.
Seeing them again filled me with gratitude and filled me with hope.
Para mí, la felicidad es simplemente estar con mi familia y disfrutar momentos felices con ellos.
To me, happiness is simply being with my family and being able to spend simple memories with them.
Cuando estuve detenido, siempre recordé momentos hermosos con mi familia, momentos de ir al parque, de ir al trampolín con mis hijos.
When I was detained, I remembered memories with my family, going to the park with them, going to the trampoline with my children.
Esos momentos me darán fuerzas y esperanza para seguir luchando.
Those moments will continue to give me hope to continue in this fight.
A toda la familia también que han sufrido separaciones y que viven constantemente por la amenaza de ser separadas, quiero decirle, aunque la injusticia nos está golpeando duro, no perdamos la fe.
To all the families who have been separated, or to all the families who have been threatened with family separation, this administration has hit us hard. But I want to tell you guys something.
Dios está con nosotros. Dios nunca nos dejará. Dios hace justicia a toda la injusticia que han hecho.
God is with us, and God will never leave us. God will bring justice to all of the injustice that we are suffering.
Nuestra comunidad nos respalda y al final se va a hacer justicia. El amor y la familia triunfará.
With our community by our side, and with our family by our side, love will trump.
Nunca pierdan la esperanza.
Never lose hope.
Volverán a ver a su familia.
You will once again see your family too.
Independientemente de lo que pase hoy,
Regardless of what happens here today,
con ICE, prométenme esto,
in my ICE checking, promise me this,
que seguirán luchando, orando, creyendo en la dignidad y la libertad, no solo para mí, para todos.
The story Abrego Garcia is originally a Salvadoran national who entered the U.S. in 2011 at age 16 and settled in Maryland with a U.S. citizen wife and child. In 2019, an immigration judge granted him withholding of removal from El Salvador because of credible risks of gang-related violence. Yet in March 2025, he was deported to El Salvador anyway, in effect in violation of a court order. Then, after months of litigation, he was returned to the U.S. in June. But now the U.S. government, through the U.S. Department of Justice, DOJ, and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, is seeking to deport him again, this time not back to El Salvador, but to Liberia. The DOJ motion says all legal avenues are exhausted and asks the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland, Judge Paula Zinnes, to dissolve its injunction so removal to Liberia can proceed. CBS News. Liberia for a Salvadoran national? That question has ignited debate. The Liberian government says it will receive him on a strictly humanitarian and temporary basis, following U.S. requests, emphasizing it is acting of its own free will and in line with international law and human dignity. Critical analysis. What's really going on? A. Legal and procedural concerns. The DOJ claims that an asylum officer interviewed Abrego Garcia on October 28 and concluded that he failed to show a likelihood of persecution or torture in Liberia. The government asserts that petitioner's claims are procedurally barred multiple times over and fail on the merits. The DOJ further says that Liberia has given sufficient and credible assurances he will not be harmed or sent elsewhere. Spectrum Local News. His attorneys counter that a single interview does not satisfy due process requirements. They say the government's decision to deport him to Africa, countries he has no ties to, rather than Costa Rica, which has offered refugee status, suggests retaliation. When the government lost in civil court, they brought criminal charges. When the criminal case didn't go to their liking, they sought third country removal. The pattern, they argue, is punitive. The broader issue: can the U.S. send someone to a country with which he has no ties as part of a third country removal strategy? U.S. courts are now grappling with how much review is permitted over diplomatic assurances and foreign policy decisions in removal cases. The DOJ argues such decisions fall within the executive branch's diplomatic domain. B. Political and human rights implications. This case is emblematic of the Trump administration's aggressive posture on immigration, especially under claims of gang links, allegations that Abrego Garcia denies. The fact that he was deported incorrectly to El Salvador in March, despite a judge's ruling, has fueled sharp criticism. AP News. Now, using Liberia as a destination, a West African country, signals a shift, moving beyond the Americas into Africa for third country removal. It raises questions. Are such arrangements in the interests of the recipient nation? What safeguards exist? For Liberia, it presents a diplomatic balancing act, upholding its international dignity and relations with the U.S., while ensuring no setback to its human rights record or credibility as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. See Africa-wide comparison. Let's widen the lens. Africa has increasingly become a terrain for migration and deportation dynamics, whether Africans deported from Europe or non-Africans sent to Africa as third country removals. The Abrego Garcia case is a rare instance of a U.S. deportee being sent to Africa who has no ties to the continent. Compare this with cases in Europe. For example, EU states sending migrants to transit countries in Africa under Dublin-type or third country agreements. The difference here: the individual has strong ties to the U.S., family in the U.S., previously protected status, and the destination, Liberia, is chosen by the U.S., not by him. For Africa, this raises strategic concerns. Are African states becoming offshore removal sites for other countries' migration burdens? What does that mean for their sovereignty, for the rights of the transferred individuals, and for Africa's role in global migration governance? Liberia's acceptance on strictly humanitarian and temporary basis suggests caution. Yet human rights groups may ask, does the move advance or undermine protections? D. Forward-looking implications. What lies ahead? Judge Sinis's decision. The court must decide whether to lift the injunction and allow deportation or maintain it pending review of due process and fairness concerns. That decision will set a precedent for how much judicial oversight there is in third country removals to places like Africa. Effect on Abrego Garcia's criminal case. He faces human smuggling charges in Tennessee, which his lawyers claim are retaliatory. If he's removed before resolution, his access to due process in that case may be compromised, raising separation of powers concerns. Politico. African states' participation. If Liberia proceeds, other African states may be approached by the U.S. or other countries to accept third country removals. The dynamics of such agreements, assurances, monitoring, legal rights, will be tested. Domestic U.S. politics. This case will continue to fuel debates over the scope of presidential power in immigration, the use of what critics call rendition-style removals, and the impact on families and long-term residents. For Africa's migration governance, the case underscores the need for African Union frameworks and regional policies that protect the rights of persons transferred to African states and ensure Africa is not simply a dumping ground. So, here we stand, a Salvadoran-born man living in the U.S. with family ties in Maryland, facing removal to Liberia under a U.S. motion claiming all legal hurdles have been cleared. Liberia says yes on humanitarian terms and after consultations, yet the optics and legal questions are profound. The case exemplifies how migration policy, human rights, and geopolitics intersect, and how Africa is becoming a stakeholder and perhaps target in global removal strategies. But the story isn't over. The court, the U.S. government, the Liberian government, human rights advocates, and Africa's migration governance architecture all have a stake. We will continue to monitor how this develops, the court's ruling, Liberia's implementation of assurances, and the ripple effects in Africa and beyond. As the courtroom drama unfolds in Maryland, international observers are watching with growing concern. Human rights groups such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have already hinted that they may file amicus briefs questioning the legality and ethics of transferring a non-African national to Liberia under a U.S. deportation order. They argue that such transfers could establish a dangerous global precedent, where powerful states externalize their migration challenges to smaller, cooperative nations. Liberia's Diplomatic Balancing Act. Inside Monrovia, the government's decision has divided opinion. Some Liberians praise the move as a show of international solidarity, proof that their nation can act responsibly on the global stage. Others criticize it as a form of quiet neo-colonial compliance, warning that welcoming controversial deportees could expose the country to unnecessary diplomatic and security risks. Civil society groups have also expressed worries about transparency. "We respect our government's humanitarian values," said Joseph Boakai II, an analyst at the Liberia Policy Forum, "but we must ensure that our soil is not used as a geopolitical testing ground for other countries' migration experiments." At the same time, Liberia's newfound seat as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council adds complexity. The world is watching how Monrovia manages issues that intersect sovereignty, diplomacy, and international law. Analysts in Accra and Abuja note that this could either elevate Liberia's moral authority or risk its credibility if the transfer turns controversial. Africa's broader dilemma. Across the continent, similar questions are simmering. In Rwanda, the government continues to defend its migration partnership with the United Kingdom, despite court battles in London. In Niger and Tunisia, EU-funded migration management centers have faced criticism for detaining asylum seekers under harsh conditions. And now, in Liberia, the world sees a U.S. variant of that same externalization logic. It reveals a broader truth. Africa's growing geopolitical importance is no longer just about minerals or markets. It's about migration diplomacy. Wealthier states are increasingly negotiating with African nations as buffers for migration control. The question for Africa as a bloc is whether this diplomacy strengthens its bargaining power or chips away at its sovereignty. U.S. domestic politics and the Trump factor. Back in Washington, the Abrego Garcia case has reignited fierce debate. Supporters of former President Donald Trump applaud the administration's no-nonsense immigration enforcement, claiming it deters illegal crossings. Critics, however, see it as part of a pattern of overreach, one that weaponizes deportation to project toughness, even at the cost of human rights. With the 2026 U.S. elections approaching, immigration once again dominates political headlines. Analysts suggest that high-profile deportation cases like Abrego Garcia's are being used to test the political mood, shaping campaign rhetoric around national security and border control. Legal limbo for Abrego Garcia. Meanwhile, Abrego Garcia's legal fate remains uncertain. His attorneys have filed emergency motions urging Judge Paula Sinis not to lift the injunction until an immigration judge formally reviews the asylum officer's findings. "You cannot outsource justice," said one of his lawyers in remarks quoted by CBS News. "A man's life and family are at stake, and due process cannot be replaced by diplomatic assurances." As of this week, his defense team is preparing to present new evidence, including letters from Costa Rican officials confirming that the Central American nation remains willing to grant him refugee status. Whether the U.S. will acknowledge that offer or continue its push for third country removal remains to be seen. A mirror for African leadership. This case also holds a mirror to African leaders. Many nations on the continent have condemned Europe for offshoring asylum seekers to African soil. Yet Liberia's acceptance of a Salvadoran deportee under U.S. request exposes a moral dilemma. Can Africa demand respect for its citizens abroad while hosting deportees from other continents? Pan-African voices argue that Africa must craft a continental migration framework under the African Union, defining clear rules on third country transfers, asylum reciprocity, and humanitarian reception. Without such coordination, countries risk being picked off one by richer states seeking temporary humanitarian partners. As the Maryland courtroom prepares for another hearing, the international spotlight remains fixed on two capitals an ocean apart, Washington and Monrovia. For Washington, the stakes are legal and political, testing how far executive power can go in enforcing deportations that intersect foreign policy. For Monrovia, the stakes are moral and diplomatic, preserving the nation's humanitarian image while avoiding perceptions of political subservience. Humanitarian gesture or diplomatic precedent. Inside Liberia, preparations are reportedly underway to accommodate Kilmar Abrego Garcia under strict supervision and limited movement. According to Reuters, the agreement between the U.S. and Liberia outlines a temporary and humanitarian stay with full respect for his human rights and safety assurances monitored through bilateral diplomatic channels. But even with such arrangements, legal analysts caution that temporary can easily become permanent. History is replete with examples where humanitarian placements gradually evolve into indefinite detentions or stateless limbo. The African Union's Migration Policy Framework, 2018, warns precisely against such ambiguities, urging African states to maintain sovereignty over who is admitted, under what status, and for how long. For Liberia, a country still healing from years of civil war and social reconstruction, taking in a foreign national entangled in U.S. legal politics presents reputational risks. It is a bold but delicate dance between compassion and caution. Africa's place in the global migration chessboard. Zooming out, Abrego Garcia's story is not just about one man. It reflects the global imbalance in migration governance. In Rwanda, London's proposed migrant plan has faced strong international criticism for treating asylum seekers as transactional commodities. In Niger and Tunisia, European-backed detention centers are shaping migration flows through incentives and sanctions. Now, Liberia joins the conversation, voluntarily stepping into the humanitarian spotlight, but inadvertently opening Africa to a new form of migration diplomacy. If the continent does not define its red lines, it risks being used as a geopolitical buffer zone, a place where wealthier nations reroute unwanted migrants while maintaining moral distance from their own policies. This trend highlights a strategic gap. Africa urgently needs a continental position on third-country deportations, one that safeguards both its sovereignty and its human rights obligations. The human element. Amid all this legal jargon and geopolitical maneuvering lies the life of one man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a husband, father, and once protected immigrant who now sits in detention, awaiting an uncertain future. His case embodies the contradiction of modern migration politics, a system that praises human rights on paper but often falters in practice. When Abrego Garcia's wife appeared outside the Maryland courthouse last week, holding a placard that read, "He deserves justice, not exile," it underscored the human toll behind every policy debate. Her plea was simple. "We built a life here. He made mistakes, but he is not a criminal. Sending him to a place he's never been is not justice, it's politics." Forward. Look, what happens next? Judge Paula Sinis's next ruling will determine whether Abrego Garcia's deportation proceeds or remains frozen pending a full hearing. Should the injunction be lifted, the U.S. is expected to execute the removal within days, testing Liberia's readiness to host him and the credibility of the U.S.'s diplomatic assurances. If the injunction stands, the U.S. government may appeal, prolonging a legal tug-of-war that symbolizes the deeper contest between law, morality, and state power. Advice to African citizens and leaders. Fellow Africans, this story should awaken us to a sobering truth. Our continent's humanitarian heart must never become a political bargaining chip. We must support compassion, but with clarity. Accepting deportees or refugees must be guided by well-defined laws, not informal diplomacy or external pressure masked as partnership. For African leaders, this is a time for foresight. The continent needs a collective migration code under the African Union, one that regulates third-country transfers, ensures accountability, and prevents the exploitation of weaker states. No African nation should act in isolation when dealing with global powers on matters that affect the continent's dignity and sovereignty. For African citizens, vigilance is key. Migration policy is no longer an abstract issue. It touches economics, security, and human rights. We must demand transparency, uphold compassion, and challenge policies that compromise national or continental integrity. Key takeaways. 1. Abrego Garcia's deportation case exposes the blurred lines between diplomacy and justice in global migration policy. 2. Liberia's acceptance of the U.S. request reflects both humanitarian goodwill and strategic risk for Africa's global image. 3. Africa's sovereignty and migration governance must be strengthened through coordinated continental frameworks. 4. Human rights must remain central to any migration partnership, whether between Africa, Europe, or the United States. 5. Citizens and leaders alike must reject the use of Africa as a dumping ground for political convenience and insist on mutual respect in international dealings. The Abrego Garcia case is more than a legal battle. It's a mirror reflecting how the world views Africa's role in global justice and diplomacy. It challenges our leaders to protect both humanity and sovereignty, and it calls on every African to stay informed, engaged, and unafraid to speak boldly. I'm Amie Kallon, and this has been Africa Now, weekly digest on the Bold African Voice. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell notification so you never miss our deep dive reports and fearless African perspectives. Until next time, stay informed, stay bold, and stay proudly African.